Let's draw a line in the sand. Loyalty trigger number 4 is your manifesto. Before I explain the manifesto, let me illustrate how powerful it can be. The year is 1517. A fat, quarrelsome monk who loved beer as much as he loved God nailed a handwritten paper to the door of the castle church in Wittenberg, Saxony. Martin Luther. His 95 Theses were really just words on paper, but in the coming year, those words on paper would split Christendom in half. They would lead to the downfall of popes, downfall of kings, downfall of emperors. It would launch new dynasties, and frankly, it would create the modern world. That is the power of a well-done manifesto. So what is a manifesto? Well, let's start by explaining what a manifesto is not. Before there were manifestos, there were creeds. A creed is a statement of beliefs. It's really just a series of bullet points that describe each belief. Now, creeds are good for articulating what a person or a group believes, but creeds, almost by design, don't have much appeal to non-believers. A manifesto, though, is different. A well-done manifesto is like creed on crack. Done right, a manifesto creates a powerful emotional reaction. I'm going to take you on a quick tour through history and review some famous manifestos and some not so famous ones. The first great manifesto, for our purposes anyway, was the United States Declaration of Independence. Now, after we look at some other manifestos, so you can get a feel for them, we'll dig into the structure and format of a great manifesto so that you have an idea of how to create your own. Here's one I'll bet you've never heard of, the Act of Abjuration. It happened during the Dutch revolt from Spain in 1581. This Act of Abjuration declared that the Dutch magistrates were freed from their oaths of loyalty to King Philip of Spain. It laid out the reason for this political revolution, and it declared that Dutch provinces would be self-governing. Now, this manifesto preceded the U.S. Declaration of Independence by almost 2 centuries. Thomas Jefferson certainly had the Dutch manifesto in mind when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. The Communist Manifesto was written in 1848. It did 3 things as it laid out the communist program. First, it enumerated the offenses of the bourgeois. Second, it described the rise of the proletariat. And finally, it announced the glorious future of world communism. The Futurism Manifesto was created in 1904. In it, the writer expressed his artistic philosophy. It specifically rejected the past, and it laid out a radical program for the future of art. Apple's original Macintosh ad, 1984. That was one of the first great digital manifestos. It portrayed this dystopic gray world where people had been reduced to mere cogs in a big impersonal wheel. Now, in the space of 60 short seconds, this ad proclaimed the dawning of a new age with new computers that were built for the rest of us. So, we've seen a lot of examples. What exactly is a manifesto? Now, the term manifesto is from the Latin phrase manu festus, which means struck by hand. That phrase, well, it implies a sense of urgency and a bias toward action rather than a bias toward reasoned contemplation. When Martin Luther struck by hand his 95 Theses, he was drawing a line in the sand. With those 95 Theses, he declared war on the status quo. He proclaimed a vision of a much better world, and most importantly, he issued a clarion call for the true believers to join him in this revolution. Now, was he right about everything he said? We have no way of knowing. But we do know this. We know that by declaring his intentions and having a bias for action, he helped create the modern world. We know 2 things about people who have a bias towards action. One, They make a lot of silly mistakes, preventable mistakes probably, but two, they get a lot done really fast. A great manifesto conveys this sense of urgency as if the writer blurted it out in the heat of the moment. He was probably a little crazed, maybe a little drunk or a little high. He probably wrote it on the back of a cocktail napkin sometime well after midnight. And after recording his mad vision of the better world to come, he probably danced the night away and awoke slightly hungover on the beach the next morning as the sun rose over the ocean. It's that kind of passion. In other words, a manifesto is an utterly unreasonable document. Do you have that kind of passion? Are you ready to be unreasonable in your pursuit of a better world? The Manifesto of Futurism had exactly that sort of beginning. In fact, in the preamble, the author admits to getting drunk, speeding around in his car like a crazy man, rolling the car into a ditch, and being rescued by a fisherman. And the manifesto itself is even more audacious. Just look at some of the things it proclaims. We intend to sing the love of danger, the habit of energy and fearlessness. We want to hymn the man at the wheel who hurls the lance of his spirit across the earth along the circle of its orbit. It goes on like that for some time. So, why does a manifesto work? How does it trip those loyalty triggers? Well, that's what we're going to look at next. A manifesto is intentionally provocative. Any manifesto worth reading or worth hearing will issue impossible demands. It's not an appeal to reason so much as a provocation to action. It's not targeted at rationality, but at passion. A manifesto is not a white paper. It's not a vision statement or a mission statement. It's not a dry, dusty list of core values. Now, those type of documents are carefully constructed. They're thoroughly reasoned out, and they are utterly passionless. They are the bloodless, heartless, and emotionless works cranked out by a committee of bean counters. A manifesto, by contrast, is the verbal equivalent of a Molotov cocktail. Or maybe a sledgehammer hurled into a video screen. Watch this. So let's think about the human brain. In our first lesson about the fast brain and the slow brain, we talked about the fact that our fast brain deals in patterns and intuition, and the slow brain handles logic and reasoning. If you want to make an appeal to reason, then you draft a white paper. But if you want to provoke someone to take action, if you want to provoke someone to be passionately loyal, then you strike a manifesto. A manifesto does three things. It challenges the status quo, it casts a vision for a glorious new future, and it issues a clarion call to the true believers to rally around the cause. A manifesto is not reasonable, it's not restrained. It is breathless and idealistic. It is bursting with energy and, frankly, with the carelessness and recklessness of youth. Your manifesto is your line in the sand. It is a declaration of what you most passionately believe about your world, why you believe it, why you believe the world must be changed, and most importantly, what you're going to do to bring about that change. A proper manifesto will generate one of two responses. Either you're out of your mind, or that is amazing, I'm all in. Okay, so how is a manifesto put together? The essential elements of a manifesto are problem, vision, and action. Problem is the problem with the status quo. The vision is your vision of the glorious future once the status quo problem is resolved. And the action is the actions you are taking to resolve the problem and to create that future. In other words, things right now suck, but things could be awesome. And here's what we're going to do to go from suck to awesome. First, the problem. What is the exact problem with your world right now? Highlight that problem. Amplify that problem. Shine a searing light on it. Expose every crack and wrinkle, every ugly scar. In other words, even if the problem is a molehill, it's your job to turn it into a mountain. In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson declared that the colonists' rights as Englishmen had been denied by the king. He painted the king in the darkest terms possible. Anyone who read that declaration would be forced to take a side, either for it or against it. He framed the king and the British government as evil villains bent on denying the colonists their rights. Of course, that was an intolerable situation. And then in Apple's 1984 ad, a giant multinational corporation has sucked the soul from every worker. They couldn't think on their own. They couldn't act on their own. They couldn't be themselves. All they were allowed to do was to be a tiny cog in a giant impersonal machine. That's an intolerable situation. Now, once you've articulated the problem, then you declare your vision. You paint a vision of the glorious future that will result once the problem is resolved. In the Declaration of Independence, if your rights as an Englishman were being denied, then you will have your rights back, and even better, you're going to get to govern yourselves. In Apple's 1984 ad, your own thoughts and your own beliefs will now have power. You will be able to express yourself in your own individuality. Okay, we have a present state problem and a future state resolution. Now, how do we get there? That's the action. You've got to declare the action you are taking to create that future, and you must call others to join you. In the U.S. Declaration of Independence, the action was to declare that the colonists no longer owed allegiance to Great Britain and were immediately taking back their own sovereignty. They would rule themselves, thank you very much. In Apple's 1984 ad, they were creating a new kind of computer for the rest of us. Now this part, the action, it doesn't have to be detailed, specific, or for that matter, rational. It just has to be action-oriented. Now, with all that in mind, let's talk about the emotional tone of your manifesto. In our era of hyper-political correctness, you will be tempted to couch every statement in bland, bloodless terms designed to soothe, comfort, and above all, not offend. Resist that temptation. You will offend. You must offend. If you do not offend, well, then you're doing it wrong. You've got to proclaim your passionate convictions without apology and without compromise. You're not writing a creed. Declare your high-minded motivations and your divine intentions with determination, grit, and steely-eyed resolve. Be unreasonable. Accept the fact that, for now anyway, some people are going to think you're mad. Some will think you're a little extreme. Some will simply hate you. But some will rush to embrace you because you are giving voice to the words they've been longing to speak themselves. Your manifesto will serve to inspire both your followers and your enemies. It will serve as a rallying cry for your followers and as proof to your enemies that you don't deserve to exist. either of these responses are perfect. The one thing you don't want to hear in response to your manifesto is, well, isn't that nice? Do not for 1 second be afraid of making people upset or angry or annoyed. Anger, annoyance, upset, these are all indications that at the very least your manifesto is pointed in the right direction. The sign that you're doing it wrong will be if you create only enemies or only friends. You need both. Your manifesto is the anvil upon which friends are forged and enemies are broken. Now, one thing to avoid. Your manifesto must never include any statement that can be proven to be false. It's fine to proclaim things that are fantastic, incredible, even unbelievable by ordinary people, but you cannot declare things factually true which can be proven factually false. Let me illustrate. If you proclaim that the Earth is flat, that statement can be proven to be false. If you claim that the Earth is being used as a way station by transdimensional beings sent to help us achieve a greater level of consciousness, you might be insane, but that doesn't really matter. Why? Because that particular belief cannot be proven false. See the difference? A final word about your manifesto, and this is likely going to sound really odd, but there is a difference between belief, in air quotes, and beliefs in all caps. Let's be frank. This is business we're talking about here. We're not trying to save souls or save the planet or even save the country. We're trying to sell something and make the world a little better place. This is a game we're playing. So, even though your manifesto should be passionately worded and stridently proclaimed, you don't have to really believe it. Shocking, I know, but them's the facts. You've just got to structure your manifesto in such a way that it creates a passionate response in both your friends and your enemies. Do that and you will hammer that loyalty trigger. So let's review. A manifesto makes impossible demands, demonizes the enemy, glorifies the future, and proclaims the action plan for getting there. Have fun.